I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
The words had barely left Prince William's mouth before the palace seemed to fall into silence. This was not another routine royal update, not another carefully polished statement designed to calm the public. This was the moment Britain learned that King Charles had made a succession decision so shocking, so personal, and so final that even those closest to the throne struggled to absorb what it meant. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William stood before the private royal briefing with the kind of control that only comes from pressure. His shoulders were steady, his face gave little away, but his voice carried something heavier than duty when he confirmed that Charles had approved an accelerated transition plan, placing the prince at the center of monarchy operations far sooner than anyone had expected. A succession decision means the formal plan for who carries royal authority and how that authority moves forward. And this one did not remove the king from the throne. It did something more painful. It allowed William to assume expanded sovereign duties, while Charles kept the crown, but stepped back from several core responsibilities. Charles had made the decision earlier that day, and the weight of it had followed him like a shadow. He sat alone with the signed papers before him, one hand resting on the edge of the desk, the other near the page that had changed the rhythm of his reign. The king did not look defeated. He looked wounded. That mattered because a monarch is not only a public figure. He is a father, a husband, and a man forced to admit that the institution he protects may now need his son more than it needs his own command. William knew every person in that room understood the danger behind the calm words. The palace had expected gradual adjustment, quiet support, and careful movement over time. Instead, the prince confirmed that the shift had already been approved before the public knew anything. He called the decision painful, necessary, and deeply personal. And for one brief second, his voice tightened. That small break said more than any official statement could. It told the room that this was not ambition. This was inheritance arriving early. An aide near the back noticed it first. William paused before saying his father's name. Not long, not dramatically. Just enough for the air to change. The future king was speaking about the monarch, but the son was still speaking about his father. And in that pause, the palace heard the real cost of the announcement. The shock was not only what Charles had decided. The deeper wound was who the decision had shaken behind closed doors. And as William's words echoed beyond the palace walls, the focus turned from the decision itself to the people now forced to live inside its shadow. Every royal decision has paperwork, procedure, and protocol. But this one had faces. Charles, carrying the loneliness of a monarch who knew his grip on power had changed. William, standing between obedience and destiny. Camilla, suddenly unsure where her influence ended. Catherine, watching her husband step closer to a burden he never asked to carry so soon. William became the public face of the decision. But the burden did not sit on him like a title. It sat on him like a wound. He was the heir, meaning the next person in line to the throne. But in that moment he was also a son, asked to explain why his father had chosen to step back from parts of his own reign. That mattered because the public would hear structure, duty, and stability. The family would hear something else entirely. They would hear the sound of time moving faster than anyone wanted. Charles remained king, but the meaning of that word had shifted inside the palace. Operational authority meant the daily power to guide royal duties, approve plans, and shape the direction of the monarchy. And now much of that weight was moving toward William. The king still wore the crown. He still held the throne. Yet everyone close to him knew this was not symbolic. It was the first visible sign that the future had entered the room and refused to wait outside. William told Catherine the truth in private, away from aides, away from prepared language, away from the careful phrases that keep royal pain hidden. He said speaking those words felt like closing a door behind my father, and Catherine heard the break beneath his calm. She did not answer quickly. She simply looked at him long enough for him to know she understood. The prince had not wanted victory, he had wanted time, and time had been taken from him. Camilla felt the ground shift in a different way. She had stood beside Charles through storms, ceremonies, judgment, and public repair. But this decision reduced the quiet influence she had built around him. The queen consort understood informal influence. meaning the private ability to shape choices without holding official command. And she knew when it was slipping. Charles had not rejected her, but he had moved the center of gravity away from her, and she felt it before anyone dared say it aloud. Catherine noticed William's hand before the briefing began. He held the notes too tightly, bending the edge of the paper, as if pressure could be controlled by grip alone. She knew that gesture. She had seen it when grief was being hidden behind discipline. A senior courtier later recorded in a private household account that Charles had asked for William first, not Camilla, when the final wording was prepared. That detail mattered because it revealed where the king had placed his trust when the moment became impossible. Charles made one choice, and every person around him felt a different loss. William lost the safety of waiting. Catherine lost the illusion that her husband's future could arrive slowly. Camilla lost a measure of closeness to the decisions that shaped the crown. And the king lost the comfort of believing his reign could remain untouched by age, pressure, and fear. Yet none of them could understand the full weight of that moment, without going back to the private trigger that forced Charles to act. Because this decision did not begin with an announcement. It began with one private incident that changed the way the monarch saw the future of his reign. Long before William confirmed anything, one closed-door moment at Windsor Castle changed the course of the monarchy. It was not a public scandal. It was not a shouting match before cameras. It was a private succession review, held behind heavy doors, where Charles heard something that made him set down his pen, look across the table, and finally accept what everyone else had feared. Charles entered that meeting believing he could still control the pace of change. William arrived, carrying the silence of a man who already knew the truth would hurt. Camilla sat close to the king, watching the room with a guarded expression, while Catherine remained near the prince, calm on the surface, but alert to every shift in his voice. The Windsor Succession Review was a private royal meeting, meant to examine the future order of duties, and in simple terms, it was supposed to decide how much responsibility William should carry, while Charles remained monarch. William did not raise his voice. That made it worse. He asked whether the institution could survive without a clear transfer of working authority. And the question landed like a blow. Working authority meant the real day-to-day control over duties, schedules, briefings, and decisions, not just the public title attached to them. The prince knew why it mattered. Without clear control, the palace risked confusion. Without clear leadership, every department would begin guessing who truly held power. And once guessing began inside a monarchy, weakness followed close behind. Charles looked wounded because he understood the meaning behind the question. William was not challenging him as a son hungry for power. He was warning him as an heir afraid of disorder. The king had spent his life waiting to lead, and now his own child was asking whether leadership itself needed to move away from him. That was not politics. That was pain dressed as duty. Camilla broke the silence first. She warned that moving too quickly would make Charles appear weakened, and she spoke with the force of someone trying to protect both a husband and a position. But William did not answer her. He simply looked at the red briefing folder in front of the advisors, and that silence became more powerful than any argument. Catherine noticed it instantly. She knew he had seen something in that folder that changed everything. A senior advisor opened the red briefing folder and read the line that became the true trigger. Several key royal duties had already been redirected toward William because departments had lost confidence in waiting. A briefing folder was a formal file used to organize sensitive royal information, and this one carried more than facts. It carried proof that the palace machinery had already begun moving before Charles had agreed to move with it. Charles read the page once, then again. The king closed the folder slowly, his fingers resting on the cover as if he could feel the future pressing against it. Camilla stared at him, suddenly quiet. William stayed still. Catherine watched his face and understood that the son had not won. He had been confirmed by the very system he feared. Charles finally looked across the table and said, "Then we stop pretending time is on our side." The words did not sound angry. They sounded finished. And in that moment, the decision was born. That sentence became the hidden spark behind everything that followed. Once Charles accepted the truth, the palace could no longer contain the emotional battle between a father protecting his reign and a son preparing to inherit its consequences. The most dangerous moment did not happen in public. It happened in a private room where protocol could not soften the truth. Charles sat at one end of the table. William stood near the fireplace, refusing to sit. Camilla watched both men with growing alarm. Then the future king said the words no son ever wants to say to his father. William had come to that room after the succession review with one demand: clarity before the palace staff began acting on fear. A succession review meant a private discussion about who should carry royal duties if the monarchy needed to shift responsibility, and this one had left too many people shaken. The prince understood why that mattered. If servants, aides, and senior officers started guessing the king's wishes, the monarchy would not look steady. It would look confused. And confusion, inside a crown built on certainty, could become dangerous faster than any scandal. Charles heard the warning, but he did not receive it gently. The king looked at his son as if every word had taken something from him. William told him uncertainty was damaging the monarchy, and Charles replied that certainty could feel like surrender. That sentence stopped the room cold. The monarch had spent his whole life preparing to rule, and now the very idea of protecting the crown required him to loosen his grip on it. He knew the logic. He hated the feeling. Camilla entered after hearing raised voices beyond the door, and the atmosphere changed the moment she appeared. The queen consort did not ask permission to speak. She pressed Charles not to give away too much authority, warning that the palace would read it as weakness, and the public would sense a fracture. But the king's face tightened when she framed his decision like defeat. He had not spent years waiting for the throne only to be told that wisdom looked like collapse. William did not flinch. He placed the unsigned transition paper on the table between them. A transition paper was a formal written plan, showing how duties would move from one royal figure to another, and this one carried the weight of a future arriving early. The prince asked his father whether history should remember this moment as courage or hesitation. Charles stared at the page. Camilla stared at William. No one moved. Charles picked up the pen, but his hand paused above the line. The king looked older in that silence. Not weak, but exposed. He told William, "You will carry more than I ever wanted to give you." The prince lowered his eyes for a moment, because beneath the authority being handed to him was a father's apology. Camilla said his name softly, but Charles did not answer her. The monarch signed the paper with one sharp movement, and the sound of the pen against the page seemed to end one version of the reign. William stood still, carrying victory like grief. The signature solved one problem, but it exposed another. Who truly controlled the future of the crown? The moment the pen touched paper, the palace stopped asking whether change was coming and began asking who would command it. Power inside a monarchy rarely announces itself with thunder. It moves through rooms, calendars, briefing papers, and the quiet transfer of names from one column to another. After Charles signed the succession decision, the palace machine began to turn. And at the center of that machine stood William, no longer waiting behind history, but stepping directly into it. William received the first revised file before most of the household understood what had changed. State briefings, meaning official updates prepared for the monarch about government, national events, and royal responsibilities, were now being routed through his office with new urgency. Long-term royal planning, the careful shaping of future tours, ceremonies, duties, and public appearances, also began moving toward the prince. That mattered, because control of the calendar is control of the message, and control of the message is control of the monarchy's future. Charles kept the crown, but the rhythm around him shifted. The king still remained the monarch, still carried the highest title, still held the sacred place at the center of the institution. Yet the practical movement of power no longer circled him in the same way. Files arrived later. Questions reached William sooner. Aides waited outside the prince's door with papers that once would have gone straight to Charles. The change was quiet. That made it more brutal. William stood alone in a corridor, staring at the revised schedule as if it belonged to someone else. A senior aide saw him there, motionless, reading the lines where his name had replaced the king's on key duties. The aide later recorded in a private household note that the prince did not smile, did not speak, and did not look proud. He looked like a man realizing that the future had arrived without asking whether he was ready. Charles watched the first duty file move away from his office, and the feeling struck him in two directions at once. Relief came first, because part of him knew the pressure could no longer sit on his shoulders alone. Then humiliation followed, sharp and silent, because every moved file reminded him that the palace was learning to operate without his constant hand. The king had chosen the transition, but choice did not make the wound smaller. Camilla discovered the change through absence. A planning conversation she would once have joined quietly moved ahead without her. The queen consort noticed the missing invitation, then the careful wording, then the silence that followed when she asked about it. Planning conversations meant private meetings where senior royals and advisors shaped upcoming decisions, and her reduced access signaled something unmistakable. Influence was being reorganized, not announced, not debated, simply taken out of reach. Catherine saw the danger before William admitted it. She found him late, still reading the same page, and told him that authority without steadiness could hollow a person out from within. The princess knew his strength was real, but she also knew strength could become a mask. William needed more than power. He needed balance, patience, and someone brave enough to remind him that duty could destroy the man behind the title if he carried it alone. The new structure looked clean on paper, but people do not bleed on paper. Charles felt the sting of surrender. Camilla felt the chill of exclusion. William felt the weight of command. Catherine felt the pressure closing around her husband. And as the system tightened around them all, the palace began to show the first signs of emotional fracture. By morning, the palace no longer felt the same. Doors opened more quietly. Aides lowered their voices before entering rooms. Schedules were rewritten with careful hands. But behind the discipline of royal order, real pain was spreading. Charles had made the decision, William had confirmed it, and now everyone around them had to adjust to a monarchy that had changed overnight. William saw the first proof in the movement of papers. Key briefings began landing in his office before they reached the king's desk, and that small change carried enormous meaning. Briefings are official updates prepared to guide royal decisions, and when they move from one office to another, power moves with them. The prince understood why it mattered. Staff no longer treated him as a future answer. They treated him as the person who had to answer now. Charles felt the shift in a quieter, crueler way. The king received a revised folder with William's name placed above his own on several planning pages, and for a moment, he simply stared. Planning pages are palace documents that organize future duties, meetings, and public roles, and their order shows who is expected to lead. Charles pushed the folder away without speaking. He had signed the decision to protect the crown, but the crown had answered by showing him exactly what he had given up. Camilla sat alone after one meeting ended, without her input. The queen consort had expected disagreement, even discomfort, but she had not expected absence. No one had insulted her. No one had challenged her openly. That made it worse. Influence was not being ripped from her hands. It was being removed quietly, room by room, invitation by invitation, until she could feel the silence taking shape around her. William learned the deepest cut from a senior official who chose his words carefully. Some senior offices had prepared for the transfer days before the prince emotionally accepted it. Senior offices are the palace teams responsible for managing royal work, and their early preparation proved the system had already moved ahead. William did not react with anger. He looked down at the file, then asked one simple question. How long have they been ready? The answer hurt, because readiness meant the palace had been waiting for him before he was ready for himself. A single chair made the change impossible to ignore. An aide removed it from a small strategy meeting before anyone arrived, and everyone understood whose place had vanished. The gesture was quiet, but it spoke loudly. Camilla noticed. Charles noticed. William noticed too. And the prince looked away because the new order was no longer theory. It had become furniture, doors, names, and silence. Charles carried the pain like a private punishment. He wanted the monarchy safe, but safety now looked like distance from the center of his own reign. William carried a different burden. He had not stolen power, but he was being asked to hold it while his father watched. Success had arrived wrapped in grief, and beneath every royal document, every changed schedule, every carefully lowered voice, a family wound kept opening wider. Because when father and son were finally left alone, the decision would stop looking like politics and begin looking like heartbreak. There were no advisors in the room this time. No folders, no palace language, no carefully prepared lines. Just Charles and William, father and son, standing inside the silence left by a decision neither of them could undo. For the first time since the announcement, the future king was not speaking for the monarchy. He was speaking to his father. William had chosen this visit carefully. He did not request another formal meeting, because a formal meeting meant advisors, notes, records, and guarded words. The prince came because the fallout had become too personal to leave inside paperwork. A formal meeting is an official discussion arranged through palace staff, but this moment needed no staff at all. It mattered because the decision had already changed duties, schedules, and public expectations. Now it had to face the one thing no royal system could manage for them: the pain between a father and a son. Charles had spent the evening alone, rereading the statement William gave to the nation. The king knew every sentence by then, yet he kept returning to the same lines, as if repetition could make them easier to accept. A public statement is an official message meant to explain a major event to the people. And this one had done its job too well. It steadied the monarchy. It reassured the country. But it also made the transfer feel real, in a way Charles could no longer soften. William stood before him with the weight of the whole week in his face. He admitted that confirming the decision felt like betraying him, even though he knew it was necessary. The prince did not dress the truth in noble language. He said the words plainly, because plain words were all that remained. Charles listened without interrupting, and the silence between them became less like anger and more like grief. Charles finally answered with a confession of his own. He told William that the hardest part was not giving him responsibility. The hardest part was watching him become ready for it. The king had feared delay would leave his son facing chaos instead of preparation, and that fear had pushed his hand toward the signature. He had not signed because he wanted distance. He had signed because love, at its most painful, sometimes looks like surrender. William understood then what the palace had not seen. This was not a father losing faith in himself. This was a monarch trying to protect his heir from a storm that could arrive without warning. The prince reached for Charles's hand, briefly, almost carefully, as though even tenderness had to obey the weight of the crown. But that small gesture changed the meaning of everything. Charles did not pull away. The king held his son's hand for one quiet moment, and the succession decision stopped feeling like a palace crisis. It became a family surrender. William had carried the announcement like a burden. Charles had carried the signature like a wound. Now both men understood that neither had escaped the cost. The private wound had softened, but outside the gates, Britain was already deciding what this moment meant. By sunrise, the story had escaped every palace wall. It moved through newspaper presses, television studios, online headlines, and conversations outside royal gates. The nation did not simply hear that Charles had made a succession decision. It felt the meaning of it. A king had stepped back without stepping down, and a future king had stepped forward before the world was ready. William watched the coverage with Catherine beside him, and for once, the noise outside felt louder than the silence inside. The palace had released a controlled statement, meaning an official message written to guide public understanding without revealing every private detail. It confirmed the prince's expanded responsibilities while making clear that Charles remained monarch. That mattered because the crown needed calm. If the public believed the king had lost control, the monarchy could look unstable. If the palace said too little, the silence would invite panic. Catherine noticed how still William became when the first broadcaster used the phrase, "transfer of authority." The princess did not interrupt him. She knew the country was judging something that had already hurt him in private. Broadcasters framed the moment as the clearest shift of royal power in a generation. And that mattered because public language can harden into history. Once the country begins naming a change, the palace can no longer soften it with careful wording. Charles heard the sharpest line alone. A commentator described the decision as the beginning of William's reign in all but name, and the king's expression tightened. Reign means the period when a monarch rules, and those words cut because they suggested the future had already begun while he still wore the crown. Charles did not argue with the screen. He simply looked away, as if the sentence had entered the room and refused to leave. Camilla heard the same coverage from another room, and the queen consort understood what the public would not say politely. If William was now being treated as the center of royal direction, then her place beside Charles had also changed in the eyes of the nation. She had survived judgment before. She had stood through colder storms. But this was different. This was not about being accepted. This was about being bypassed. A major newspaper captured the whole country's feeling with one front page. It showed Charles in shadow beside William in sharp light, under the headline, "The Crown Moves Forward." The image moved through breakfast tables, phone screens, and studio panels before the palace could breathe. It mattered because people remember symbols faster than statements, and that front page turned a private family decision into a national turning point. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace in stunned silence. They did not cheer. They did not rage. They lifted phones toward the gates as if history might open them. William saw the footage and lowered his eyes. Catherine placed one hand near his arm, steady but quiet. Charles remained in another room, carrying the strange pain of being defended by a decision that also diminished him. The world had finally seen the scale of what happened, but headlines could not decide its final meaning. When the noise settled, one truth remained sharper than every broadcast. The monarchy had crossed a line it could never uncross. In the end, this was not simply a story about succession. It was a story about a king who understood that holding power too tightly could damage the institution he spent his life preparing to lead. It was about a son who accepted responsibility before his heart was ready. And it was about a monarchy forced to choose survival over comfort. Charles had made many decisions in his life, but this one became the defining moment of his reign. A reign means the period when a monarch rules, and for the king, this period would now be remembered not only for what he held, but for what he was willing to release. That mattered because the monarchy survives by appearing steady, but it only grows stronger when those inside it accept change before crisis forces it upon them. Charles chose institutional stability over personal pride, and that choice carried a pain few people outside the palace could truly understand. William's confirmation marked the moment he stopped being only the heir and became the practical center of royal continuity. Royal continuity means keeping the monarchy stable from one generation to the next, especially during moments of pressure. The prince had not taken the crown, but he had become the man the system looked toward first. That mattered because the public needed reassurance, the palace needed direction, and the family needed someone strong enough to carry the burden without turning it into triumph. Charles remained king, but stepping back while still wearing the crown left him with a wound that ceremony could not hide. He had protected the institution, yet the protection required distance from parts of the role he had waited a lifetime to hold. The monarch understood the sacrifice. He knew the decision would be judged by headlines, whispered about in corridors, and studied by those who measure power through titles. But behind all of that, he was still a father who had handed his son a weight he never wanted him to carry so soon. William carried the other half of that pain. He looked stronger in public because he had to. He spoke with steadiness because the country needed it. But privately, the prince grieved the change. He was not celebrating his father's retreat. He was mourning the moment when duty had asked him to step forward, while his heart still wanted to stand beside Charles as a son. Camilla's reduced influence, Catherine's quiet support, and William's expanded role all proved that a new royal order had taken shape. A royal order means the structure of power, duties, and influence inside the monarchy, and this new one no longer moved around Charles alone. Camilla had felt the chill of being moved farther from the center. Catherine had become the calm force keeping William steady, and the prince had become the living bridge between the reign that was changing and the future now taking form. The true revelation was not panic. It was control. Charles signed the succession decision before confusion could define the monarchy for him. He chose evolution over denial. He gave William not just authority, but permission to lead. And in doing so, the king turned a painful surrender into one final act of command. The story ends with Charles and William standing on opposite sides of the same duty. One man surrendered part of his reign. The other accepted the weight of the future. The decision hurt them both, but it also saved the crown from uncertainty. The monarchy did not collapse under the shock. It hardened, changed, and moved forward. Charles remained king, but William became the man the institution would now look to first. That was the true meaning of the succession decision. Not replacement, but passage. Not defeat, but sacrifice. Not an ending, but a crown finding its next steady hand. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.